My right hand was bleeding all over his bathroom sink, while Adrian Thompson cleaned the wound with a gentleness I'd never expect from a financial consultant. What started as a regular masonry job was about to turn into the most intense experience of my life. If you want to find out how a casual encounter can completely transform two lives, like and subscribe to the channel. My name is Connor Mitchell. I'm 42, and I've been working as a stonemason since I was 18. I was born in rural Texas, where I learned that a real man builds with his own hands and doesn't talk much. 3 months ago, after my 8-year relationship ended in a way I'd rather not remember, I packed up my white van and my tools and moved to Portland, Oregon. I chose this city precisely because it's the opposite of everything I knew. Here, no one knows my story. No one looks at me with pity or curiosity. I can just be Connor, the stonemason who does an honest day's work and goes home without answering to anyone. My apartment still has boxes scattered around the living room. Not because I don't have time, but because unpacking would mean admitting I plan to stay. And I'm not sure about anything lately. My routine is simple and predictable. I wake up at 5:30 in the morning, whether it's a Monday or a Saturday. Black coffee, strong enough to wake the dead. I review the day's schedule, load the van with the necessary materials, and head out before Portland fully wakes up. I like the silence of the empty streets, the smell of rain that always hangs in the air here. I specialize in stone walls and residential renovations, work that requires patience, precision, and physical strength. My hands are calloused, scarred from years of holding a hammer and a drill. I have a scar on my left arm from when a brick hit me in my 20s. Another on my chin from a bar fight I'd rather forget. My body tells stories my mouth rarely shares. People see me as reserved, sometimes even rude. It's not true. I just learned that talking too much only brings trouble. I prefer to express feelings through what I build. A well-made wall says more about my character than 1,000 words. When I take a job, the client can be sure it will be executed to perfection, even if I don't smile much in the process. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The complete, unfiltered stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. Check the link in the description right now. The residential Portland neighborhood where I work looks like something out of an American movie you'd see on TV. 2-story houses with immaculate gardens, white picket fences, wide sidewalks where kids ride their bikes without a care. It's the kind of place where everyone knows everyone, where neighbors borrow sugar from each other and know the name of the family dog next door. I always arrive at 7 in the morning sharp. The metallic clang of tools in the van has become familiar. Wrenches hitting hammers, cement bags making that dry sound, the heavy electric drill sliding back and forth with every turn. The neighborhood is still waking up when I park. Some windows have lights on, the smell of fresh coffee wafts out of half-open doors, dogs bark lazily in backyards. My work routine never varies. I unload the materials, organize the tools by order of use, measure twice before making any cut. Dad always said that haste is the enemy of perfection, and 42 years later, I still hear his voice every time I pick up a ruler. First, I analyze the ground. Then I calculate how many bricks I'll need. What kind of cement works best for the weather conditions. During breaks, I watch life happen around me. Men in suits rushing off to work, women taking kids to school, mail carriers who greet everyone by name. There's something comforting in this predictability, in this feeling that everyone has their place and their function. Sometimes I wonder what it would be like to be part of a community like that, to have neighbors who know my name and ask how my weekend was. The sound of my drill blends in with the neighborhood's daily noises. Lawnmowers, vacuum cleaners, TVs on for the morning news. Kids play in the yards while I work, and their laughter reminds me of a time in life that feels very distant. Sometimes they stop to watch what I'm doing, ask questions about the tools, and I answer them with more patience than I usually have for adults. It rains a lot in Portland, but not the way it rains in Texas. Here, it's a constant fine drizzle that wets things slowly and takes forever to dry. I've learned to work even with this humidity in the air, protecting fresh cement with plastic tarps, adjusting my schedule according to the forecast. There are days when the whole city is gray, enveloped in a mist that makes everything feel like a blurry dream. It was Tuesday, October 9th, when I rang the doorbell at number 247 for the first time. I remember the date because it was neatly noted in my planner. A. Thompson, garden wall plus kitchen remodel. I expected to find just another ordinary client, maybe a young family wanting to improve their property before more kids came along. I had no idea that my life was about to take a completely unexpected turn. The door opened, and Adrian Thompson stood in front of me. First thing I noticed, tired eyes, the kind that carry too much weight for their age. He was about 35, with messy dark brown hair like he'd run his hands through it a bunch, a coffee mug in his right hand. He was wearing a light blue dress shirt, even though he was home on a Tuesday morning. There was something too formal about his posture, as if he was always ready for a business meeting. "Are you the stonemason?" he asked without a smile, his voice hoarse like he'd been smoking for years or hadn't slept much the night before. I confirmed with a nod, waiting for him to invite me in. He hesitated for a few seconds, looked back as if checking on something, then opened the door all the way. "Come in. The kids are still asleep, so try not to make noise." The inside of the house told a story I recognized immediately. Cardboard boxes piled in the corner of the living room, furniture positioned provisionally, stacks of legal documents on the coffee table. It was the house of a recently separated man, still trying to organize the pieces of a life that had been cut in half. Photographs of the kids were scattered on the sideboard, but no couple photos were in sight. Adrian led me to the kitchen, which really did need a remodel. Chipped cabinets, a dripping faucet, tiles with damp stains. "My ex-wife insists the kitchen is in terrible condition," he commented in a tired tone. "She's not wrong." I took a sip of the coffee he offered, and silently agreed. I'd seen kitchens in worse shape, but this one definitely needed attention. "How long will it take?" he asked, getting straight to the point. "The kids can't be inconvenienced. They've been through enough changes." The concern in his voice was genuine, paternal. I explained that the wall would take about 2 weeks, the kitchen another 3. He nodded, but I saw the tension in his shoulders, as if he was mentally calculating not just the cost in money, but the disruption to his family. We went out to the garden, and that's when I first saw the space where I'd be working for the next 2 months. A spacious backyard, a well-kept lawn, a few fruit trees planted with care. "I need privacy for the kids," he explained, pointing to the low fence that separated his property from the neighbors. "They like to play out here, but—" He left the sentence hanging. I understood perfectly. Kids of divorced parents need spaces where they can just be kids, without feeling curious stares or malicious comments. In that first meeting, Adrian seemed like a man carrying burdens too heavy for his shoulders. He spoke little, smiled even less, and kept a physical distance as if he were afraid of human contact. I was just another service provider in his complicated life, another problem to solve on a list that seemed endless. At least, that's what I thought. The first 2 weeks were strictly professional. I'd show up, work, and leave. Adrian would go to his office. I found out he worked as a financial consultant for small businesses, and come back in the late afternoon. Our interactions were limited to "good morning" and "see you tomorrow." Maybe a question about the progress of the work. He paid on time, didn't complain about the noise, and kept the kids away from the work area. Emma, the 7-year-old daughter, was the first to break the ice. One morning she appeared in the garden with a sketchbook, sat on a plastic chair, and started drawing me working. She had curly blonde hair and an impressive concentration for her age. "Dad said you're going to build a really nice wall," she commented without looking up from her paper. "It's true? Want to see how it works?" I offered, and she nodded enthusiastically. Logan, the 10-year-old son, was more reserved, but just as curious. He would watch from a distance while I lined up bricks, measured distances, and mixed cement. One day he came over and asked for the name of each tool. I explained patiently: the drill, the hammer, the level, the trowel. He repeated the names as if he were memorizing vocabulary for a test. "My dad doesn't know how to use any of this stuff," he commented innocently. It was Adrian who offered me coffee for the first time. It was a cold October morning, and I was drinking from an old thermos I'd brought from home. He appeared in the garden with a steaming cup. "I thought you might want something hot," he said, almost shyly. The coffee was perfect, strong, no sugar, exactly how I like it. "Thanks," I replied, and I noticed he stayed a few minutes longer watching the work before going back inside. Gradually we started talking during breaks. Adrian was genuinely interested in the construction technique. He'd ask why I chose specific stones, how I calculated the amount of cement needed, how many years of experience it took to do a job like this. His questions were intelligent, revealing an analytical mind accustomed to understanding complex processes. I, who rarely explained my work to clients, found myself talking more than usual. We started having lunch together in the garden. Adrian would bring sandwiches from the kitchen. I'd share the fruit I bought at the nearby market. He talked about the challenges of working from home, of juggling single fatherhood with a demanding career. I talked about other jobs I'd done, cities I'd lived in, always avoiding too many personal details. But there was something comforting in those conversations. an ease I hadn't expected to find. During those moments, I started noticing details about Adrian that had gone unnoticed at our first meeting. The way his eyes lit up when he talked about the kids, how he unconsciously ran his hands through his hair when he was deep in thought, the way he smiled, rare, but genuine, when I told a funny story from a job site. There was a loneliness in him that I recognized because it was similar to my own. The kids started treating me as part of the family landscape. Emma would show me her drawings every day. I always kept at least one in my shirt pocket. Logan would ask about construction techniques and listen carefully when I explained basic physics through the practical work. Adrian would watch these interactions with an expression I couldn't quite decipher, but it seemed like a mix of gratitude and something deeper. By the end of October, when the wall was almost done, I noticed I was taking longer than necessary to finish each step. Not consciously, but my body moved slower. I checked measurements I already knew were correct, and I invented small adjustments that weren't essential. For the first time in 3 years, I didn't want a job to end. And from Adrian's expressions when he checked the progress, I suspected he felt something similar. November brought more intense rain and a subtle shift in the house's dynamic. Samantha, Adrian's ex-wife, started showing up more often to pick up the kids. She was an elegant woman with straight hair and a confident posture, who greeted me politely, but always with a judging look. I noticed she took a few extra minutes talking to Adrian at the door, asking questions about the work that seemed to have a double meaning. Victoria, the neighbor next door, also intensified her surveillance. A lady in her 60s with too much time on her hands and an excessive curiosity about other people's lives. She'd make comments about how the work was taking a long time for something so simple, and ask Adrian if he had checked the stonemason's references properly. Her insinuations were subtle but loaded with a prejudice I knew well. It was during this period that I started noticing changes in myself that I didn't know how to interpret. I would wake up thinking about the expression Adrian would have when I got to work. I paid attention to the clothes he was wearing, the way he greeted me, whether he looked more tired or more rested than the day before. When he smiled at something I said, I felt a satisfaction that was out of proportion to the situation. Adrian was different too. He offered coffee more often, took longer talking during breaks, and asked personal questions he hadn't asked before. "Do you have family in Portland?" he asked one afternoon. "No. I came alone," I replied. "Why?" "I mean, it's a new city for you." I hesitated before answering. "Sometimes we need to start over far from where everything went wrong," I finally said. He nodded as if he understood the feeling perfectly. One morning, Emma handed me a different kind of drawing. It was me and Adrian sitting on the bench I had built in the garden, under the jasmine tree we had planted together the week before. "You guys look like real friends," she commented innocently. I put the drawing in my pocket, but for the rest of the day, I couldn't stop thinking about her words. Real friends. Was that all it was, or was there something more complex happening? Things got complicated when Samantha found the drawing. She had arrived early to pick up the kids, and Emma, excited, showed her all the drawings she had made during the week. I saw through the kitchen window Samantha's expression change when she looked at that specific paper. There was a serious conversation between her and Adrian that I couldn't hear, but I could tell from their body language that it wasn't a calm one. That night, Adrian stayed in the garden longer than usual after the kids had gone to bed. I was organizing my tools for the next day when he approached. "Samantha asked some questions about you today," he said without preamble. "What kind of questions?" "About how long you'll be here, if we checked your references, if the kids are safe." There was an awkward pause. "And what did you say?" "That you're a competent professional, and that the kids like you." But something in the way he said it, the hesitation in his voice, his eyes avoiding mine, made me understand that there was more at stake than the kids' safety or professional competence. Samantha had noticed something that I myself was reluctant to admit. She had noticed that the way Adrian looked at me wasn't the way a client looks at a service provider. And, worse yet, she had noticed that I returned that look. That night, lying in bed in my still messy apartment, I admitted to myself something I had been avoiding acknowledging for weeks. I was developing feelings for Adrian Thompson that went far beyond friendship or professional attraction. Feelings that would complicate not only my life, but the life of a man who already had enough complications to last a lifetime. And the worst part was that from the signs I'd been picking up, I suspected he felt something similar. Saturday, November 15th. The kids had gone with Samantha to spend the weekend at their maternal grandmother's house, leaving Adrian and me alone for the first time since I started working there. The house was silent in a different way, not the tense silence of the first few days, but a quietness loaded with unspoken possibilities. I was finishing the last details of the wall, adjusting some stones that weren't perfectly aligned, when one of the boards on the old fence came loose. It had rotted from Portland's constant moisture and gave way just as I leaned on it to reach the top part of the construction. The fall was quick. My right hand scraped against the rough edge of the wood, opening a deep cut on my palm. Blood started gushing immediately, staining the dirt I had worked on for weeks. I swore under my breath, more out of anger at my own carelessness than from the pain. 42 years in the business, and I was still making basic safety mistakes. I wrapped my hand in an old rag I used to clean tools, but the fabric quickly became soaked. Adrian, who was watching from the kitchen window, ran to the garden as soon as he saw the accident. "My God, Connor, what happened?" The concern in his voice was genuine, almost desperate. "Stupid mistake. The fence gave way," I replied, trying to minimize the situation. But the cut was deeper than I initially thought, and the blood kept flowing between my fingers. "Let's go inside. I need to clean that properly," Adrian said, holding my arm firmly and leading me into the house. In the bathroom, he made me sit on the edge of the tub while he looked for first aid supplies in the cabinet. His hands were trembling slightly, a detail I noticed because my attention was completely focused on him. "I can do it myself," I offered, extending my hand. "Quiet," he ordered with an authority I didn't know he had. "You'll mess it up and make it worse." He turned on the faucet, tested the water temperature, and adjusted it until it was lukewarm. "It might hurt a little," he warned before placing my hand under the running water. The pain was intense, but bearable. What caught me off guard was the intimacy of that moment. Adrian held my hand with extreme care, cleaning the wound with precise and gentle movements. I felt his warm breath on my wrist, saw the absolute concentration on his masculine face so close to mine. His brows were furrowed, the tip of his tongue peeking out the corner of his mouth as he focused. "You need to be more careful," he whispered, but his voice came out hoarser than he intended. I looked up, and our eyes met in the mirror above the sink. This time, neither of us looked away. There was something different in Adrian's eyes, an intensity that had nothing to do with medical care. My heart pounded, and I'm sure he noticed because his thumb stopped moving on my skin. The air in the small bathroom became thick, charged with an electrical tension that had been building for weeks. Adrian dried my hand with a clean towel, his movements becoming slower and more deliberate. When he finished, his hands remained holding mine for a few seconds longer than necessary. "Adrian," I started, but he shook his head slightly. "I know," he said, almost a whisper. "I know what's happening, and I'm scared." The brutal honesty in his voice caught me off guard. Men like us don't usually admit fear so easily. "Scared of what?" I asked, even though I already knew the answer. "Of everything. Of what I'm feeling. Of what this means. Of what might happen to the kids if—" He left the sentence hanging, but I understood perfectly. He was afraid of risking the stability he had built for his children, because of feelings he didn't even know how to name. Neither of us moved away. The space between our bodies gradually diminished, as if we were magnets inevitably attracted to each other. I could feel the warmth emanating from him, the familiar smell of soap and coffee that had become part of my daily routine. Adrian closed his eyes and leaned his forehead against mine, a simple gesture that carried the weight of all the weeks of accumulated tension. "I don't know what I'm doing," he confessed, his warm breath against my skin. I raised my left hand, the one that wasn't hurt, and touched his face gently, feeling the texture of his short stubble. "I know," I replied, echoing his words from a few minutes before. And then, finally, our mouths met. The kiss started hesitantly, almost shyly, as if we were testing forbidden territory. Lips touching lightly, breaths mingling, decades of certainties being questioned in a matter of seconds. But the hesitation didn't last long. The emotional hunger we had both been carrying for months manifested with a surprising urgency. Adrian pressed his body against mine, his hands moving up to hold my face as he deepened the kiss. His palms were soft, different from my calloused hands, but there was a surprising strength in the way he held me, as if he was afraid I would disappear if he relaxed his grip. My good hand found the back of his neck, fingers tangling in the dark hair I had always wanted to touch. I felt Adrian's body trembling slightly. Nerves, desire, or maybe a mix of both. "Are you sure?" I asked against his lips. He replied by intensifying the kiss, eliminating any doubt I might have had. We left the bathroom without breaking contact, tripping slightly over the furniture in the living room, nervous laughter escaping between hungry kisses. His hands explored my chest over my t-shirt, discovering the firmness of muscles developed over years of physical labor. My hands slid down his back, feeling the unexpected softness of his skin under the dress shirt he wore even on Saturdays. In the bedroom, the golden afternoon light filtered through the curtains created an intimate and welcoming atmosphere. Adrian paused for a moment, looking into my eyes as if seeking final confirmation. I responded by pulling him closer, eliminating the last bit of space between our bodies. His shirt was the first obstacle removed, revealing a pale chest with some scattered dark hair. My t-shirt followed suit, and I saw a genuine admiration in Adrian's eyes for my body marked by hard work. His hands explored every scar, every mark, as if he were reading the story of my life through my skin. We lay down on the bed with a surprising gentleness, considering the urgency we felt. Adrian positioned himself over me, supporting his weight on his arms, looking at my face with an intensity that made me feel completely exposed. "I've never," he started, but I interrupted him with a soft kiss. "I know. It's okay. Let's take it slow." My hand slid down his back, moving slowly, feeling every muscle, every reaction. He surrendered with a vulnerability that surprised me. A man accustomed to controlling spreadsheets and financial projections was allowing himself to be guided by completely new sensations. The afternoon dissolved into mutual discoveries. Adrian learned the map of my body with a scientific curiosity that soon turned into instinctive passion. I discovered that behind the financial consultant's formality was a man capable of total surrender, of an emotional intensity that perfectly matched the physical. When the sun began to set, tinting the room in shades of orange, we were intertwined like pieces of a puzzle that had finally found their correct places. Adrian's breathing had normalized, but he kept a possessive arm over my chest, as if he wanted to make sure I wouldn't disappear when he woke up. The silence that followed wasn't awkward. It was revealing. Adrian traced invisible circles on my chest with his fingertips, lost in thoughts I could see forming in his concentrated expression. I ran my hand through his hair, now completely messy, feeling the silky texture between my calloused fingers. "This changes everything," he finally whispered, more to himself than to me. His voice carried a mixture of wonder and worry that I understood perfectly. I confirmed with a kiss on the top of his head, inhaling the smell that had become familiar, and now took on a completely new dimension. "Are you regretting it?" I asked, though I was afraid of the answer. Adrian propped himself up on an elbow to look at me directly. "No. Scared? Yes. Confused, for sure. But regretting it? Never." The sincerity in his eyes dispelled any doubt I might have had about the authenticity of what we had experienced. We talked for hours as the night took over Portland. Adrian talked about fears he had never verbalized. The worry about the kid's reaction, the anxiety about the neighbor's judgment, the terror that Samantha would use it against him in a possible custody battle. I shared my own fears. The fear of falling in love again after swearing I'd never go through it again. The concern of complicating a life that was already complex enough. "The kids like you," Adrian said, as if he were organizing his thoughts out loud. "Emma draws you every day. Logan asks about you when you're not here. That has to mean something, doesn't it?" There was hope in his voice, a need to find signs that this could work out. "And Samantha?" I asked, touching on the subject we were both avoiding. Adrian sighed deeply. "Samantha wants the kids to be happy. If she realizes you're part of that happiness, I think she can accept it. She's not a bad person, Connor. She's just protecting her children the only way she knows how." In the weeks that followed, we developed a carefully orchestrated routine. During the day, we maintained a professional formality, especially when the kids were around. But after they went to sleep, we would meet in the garden, on the bench I had built under the jasmine tree. There, away from curious eyes, we could talk freely, exchange discreet caresses, and plan a future that seemed simultaneously impossible and inevitable. The physical connection we had discovered that afternoon deepened, but it was accompanied by an even more intense emotional intimacy. Adrian told me about the marriage that ended not because of a lack of love, but because of a lack of genuine passion. I talked about previous relationships that ended because I could never fully commit. For the first time in our lives, we both felt like we had found someone who knew us completely and still chose to stay. Connor became a part of the family routine in subtle but significant ways. He helped Logan with science projects that involved building, taught Emma about different types of wood and stone, and fixed small problems around the house without Adrian having to ask. The kids began to naturally include him in conversations about future plans, treating his presence as something permanent and desirable. But the external pressure continued to grow. Victoria intensified her malicious comments, always disguised as concern for the well-being of the children. Samantha asked increasingly direct questions about my prolonged presence at the house, and I felt the weight of living a lie, hiding genuine feelings as if they were something shameful. One night, lying on the garden bench looking at the rare stars that managed to break through the city's light pollution, Adrian held my hand and said, "I don't want to hide this anymore. Not from you, not from myself, not from the people who matter." I looked at him, seeing determination where there had only been fear before. "Does that mean—" "It means I'm in love with you, Connor Mitchell. And if that's going to complicate our lives, then so be it. Some things are worth the complication." That night, for the first time since we met, I slept at his house. Not because the kids were away, but because we finally had the courage to admit that we were more than friends, more than a casual fling, more than a confusing phase in the lives of two middle-aged men. We were a couple, and it was time to start living like one. December arrived with a coldness Portland hadn't experienced in years. The mornings dawned with a thin layer of ice on the windows, and I had to warm up the van for a few minutes before I could drive to Adrian's house. The work on the kitchen was practically finished. New cabinets installed, floor replaced, modern tiles replacing the old stained ones. It was a job well done, one that would last for decades. But I knew that when it was done, I would lose my official excuse to be there every day. The situation came to a head on a Thursday when Emma came home from school with another of her drawings. This time, she had captured a specific moment. Me and Adrian sitting very close on the garden bench, with a closeness that clearly went beyond a normal professional relationship. The drawing showed our hands intertwined and smiles that any adult would recognize as intimate. Samantha arrived early that day to pick up the kids, and Emma, proud of her artwork, ran to show her the drawing before either Adrian or I could intervene. I saw through the kitchen window Samantha's expression change dramatically as she analyzed the paper. She looked directly at me through the glass, then at Adrian, and asked to talk to him in private. The conversation lasted over an hour. Through the windows, I saw tense gestures, serious expressions, moments when Samantha seemed to be asking direct questions that Adrian answered with visible honesty. At one point, she pointed in my direction, and Adrian nodded his head. My stomach tightened with the certainty that our situation had been completely exposed. When Samantha finally left with the kids, Adrian came over to where I was pretending to organize tools in the garden. His face was pale, but there was a determination in his eyes that hadn't been there before the conversation. "She knows," he said without preamble. "Knows what exactly?" I asked, though I already knew the answer. "Everything. About us. About what we feel. About how it's changed my life." "And how did she react?" The question came out more anxiously than I intended. Adrian ran his hand through his hair, a gesture I recognized as a sign of extreme nervousness. "Better than I expected. Worse than I expected. She's not furious, but she's worried. She wants to make sure the kids won't suffer because of this." In the days that followed, I felt the weight of constant scrutiny. Victoria intensified her nasty comments, always disguised as maternal concern for the poor children who have already been through so much trauma. Other neighbors started greeting us normally, especially after I offered to help Mr. Johnson build a ramp for his wife's wheelchair, free of charge. It's funny how small gestures of generosity can change ingrained perceptions about who we are. But the kids remained naturally affectionate with me. Emma continued to make drawings, now more discreetly, keeping them in her room instead of showing them to all the adults. Logan asked when I would finish fixing all the broken things in the house, as if he wanted to ensure I found reasons to keep visiting. The situation reached a breaking point on a Friday morning when Victoria appeared at the front door while I was unloading tools from the van. "Mr. Mitchell," she called out with an exaggerated formality, "I need to have a word with you." I approached the fence that separated the properties, already knowing the conversation wouldn't be pleasant. "I'm concerned about what's happening in this house," she said, without any attempt at diplomacy. "Those children have already been through a traumatic divorce. They don't need any more confusion in their lives." I kept my expression neutral, refusing to give her the satisfaction of an emotional reaction. "I don't understand your concern, Mrs. Victoria." "Oh, you don't?" She gave an unpleasant laugh. "A single man spending excessive time in a house with a divorced father and young children? People talk, Mr. Mitchell, and what they're saying isn't pretty." The insinuation was clear and venomous. She wasn't just questioning my relationship with Adrian, but also my suitability to be around the children. That night, I told Adrian about the conversation with Victoria. I saw his jaw clench in anger, a rare and intense emotion for him. "She has no right to say those things about you." You're better with my kids than most of the men I've met. His passionate defense warmed my heart, but it also intensified my guilt for having put his family in this situation. Adrian, maybe I should finish the job and step away for a while, I suggested, hating every word that came out of my mouth. Let things cool down. He looked at me as if I had suggested burning the house down. No, we're not going to let petty, prejudiced people determine how we live our lives. The resolution came from an unexpected source. Samantha showed up the following Sunday, not to pick up the kids, but to talk to me directly. Adrian was inside the house with Emma and Logan, giving us privacy for a conversation we all knew was inevitable. Connor, she began, using my first name for the first time. I need to ask you some direct questions, and I need honest answers. I agreed, preparing for the most important interrogation of my life. Do you love my ex-husband? The question was as direct as a punch. Yes, I replied without hesitation. And my children? How do you feel about them? Emma and Logan are special kids, smart, affectionate, resilient. Any man would be proud to have children like them. I could tell she was evaluating every nuance of my response. And if I say I approve of this relationship, are you prepared to take on the responsibilities that come with loving a family man? The question caught me completely off guard. I expected hostility, extreme maternal protection, maybe even legal threats. I didn't expect conditional approval. Samantha, Adrian is happier than I've seen him in years, she interrupted me. The kids talk about you constantly. Emma asked me if you'll be at her birthday party in January. Logan wants you to teach him how to build a treehouse. She sighed deeply before continuing. I don't completely understand what you two have, Connor. I don't need to. What I need is to be sure my children are safe and happy. And from what I can see, you contribute to both of those things. The conversation ended with a firm handshake and an invitation to Christmas dinner. The first official sign that I was being accepted as part of the extended family. 6 months later, on a warm June morning, I'm standing in the same garden where everything began, watching Emma and Logan play on the swing I installed in the jasmine tree. The flowers are in full bloom, filling the air with a sweet scent that has become the smell of happiness for me. The wall I built doesn't just offer privacy, it has become a symbol of the solid foundations we built together, brick by brick, day after day. The white van is still parked in front of the house every morning, but now for different reasons. I officially moved into the Thompson house in March, after Adrian and I decided that hiding our feelings was hurting not only our happiness, but also the kids. They deserved to live in an honest home, where love didn't have to be whispered or hidden. The boxes from my apartment were finally unpacked, not because I felt obligated, but because I had finally found a place where I wanted to stay permanently. My construction books share space with Adrian's finance manuals. My tools have an organized corner in the garage. My toothbrush is next to his in the bathroom. Small details that make up the architecture of a shared life. Victoria still makes occasional comments, but she's lost a lot of the audience she once had. Other neighbors have started greeting us normally, especially after I offered to help Mr. Johnson build a ramp for his wife's wheelchair, free of charge. It's funny how small acts of generosity can change ingrained perceptions about who we are. Samantha not only accepted our relationship, she became an unexpected ally. She and Adrian developed a more harmonious co-parenting relationship than they had during their marriage. You're better as an extended family than we were as a couple, she commented during a Father's Day barbecue. The kids have more stability now than they had in the last 2 years of our marriage. Emma, now 8, still makes drawings, but they have evolved to portray our family of 4 doing everyday activities. Dinners at the table, trips to the park, construction projects in the garden. Logan, almost 11, has learned enough about carpentry to be my official helper with small repairs around the house. He has skilled hands and patience, traits I recognize from my own father. My work has changed too. I still take on external projects, but now I have the stability of a fixed base. Adrian suggested I expand into residential renovation consulting, combining my practical experience with his skill for financial analysis. We're developing a small business together, another way to build something lasting. Some nights when the kids are asleep, Adrian and I sit on the garden bench, the same one where everything began to change between us. We talk about future plans, maybe expanding the house when Logan goes to high school, definitely traveling to Texas for him to meet my family, possibly adopting a dog when Emma turns 10, as we promised. You know you really love someone when you can't imagine a future without them, Adrian said on one of those nights, holding my hand under the perfume of the jasmine flowers. I used to plan my life in 5-year increments. Now I plan it thinking about all the mornings I want to wake up next to you. The transformation wasn't just ours. The whole house breathes differently now. The cardboard boxes from the separation have been replaced by family photos that include all four of us. The kitchen I remodeled became the heart of the home, where we prepare dinners together, and Emma does her math homework while Logan draws increasingly complex engineering projects. I learned that building a life is like building a wall. It requires a solid foundation, quality materials, and the patience to do each part correctly. There are no shortcuts to lasting relationships, just as there are no shortcuts to constructions that need to withstand the test of time. Each brick must be placed with care, each decision made with long-term stability in mind. Portland is no longer a city where I came to hide my wounds. It has become the place where I rebuilt my ability to love and be loved. The apartment with unpacked boxes gave way to a house where every object has its place and purpose. Where I wake up knowing I have 3 people who care about me, who count on me, who make me want to be a better version of myself every day. If you've made it this far in the story, you probably understand that sometimes love finds us in the most unexpected moments, in the most unlikely circumstances. Connor Mitchell, the lonely stonemason from Texas, never imagined he would find his forever family in a Portland house that just needed a few repairs. But I discovered that sometimes we don't fix the houses fix us. What you're hearing here is just the beginning. The complete, unfiltered stories with all the details you can imagine are available now. Check the link in the description right now. Like this story if it touched your heart in some way. Subscribe to the channel to follow more stories about how true love can appear when we least expect it and completely transform our lives. And tell us in the comments, do you believe certain people come into our lives exactly when we need them? Turn on the bell to not miss any of the next stories that will make you believe again in the transformative power of genuine feelings. Until the next construction of the heart.